first thing, well, you know, you're stuck with me. Matt had a personal emergency and was unable to travel. He coached me the best as I am coachable. I have some colleagues here that know how coachable I can be at times. So I'm going to do my very best with his piece of this, but he is an excellent coach. So that's why Matt's not here, but we'll all wish him well. And maybe we'll even at the end of this, if you guys are open to it, we'll take a giant selfie or something and send it to him as a hope you're doing well. Okay, so this whole thing came up with Matt and I because we were working on some projects. For those of you who don't know, Matt made the big move north. He's up in British Columbia, up around the Vancouver area, working with that province's health system. And he gave me a call one day because he knows I do a lot of medical device forecasting work and end of life types of work. And he said, Carol, where's the reference? What's the reference point? I'm doing a bunch of different things, which we'll talk about around end of life. And I said, there isn't one. I made the rules and I just stay consistent with them. And he says, then you need to publish it. And I said, well, then help me put a presentation together so we can at least get the thoughts put together. So that's sort of where this all came from in terms of both of us trying to solve real world problems, if you will, or answer real world questions. But the one that comes to all of us is, how do you respond? And I'm very interested, how do you guys respond when you get that question? Is this device end of life? How do you normally respond?
It could be. It depends.
Good.
You have a letter from the OEM.
Okay. Go to one source. Okay. Okay. Let me check on that. Yep. Okay. Yes, those are excellent answers. Excellent answers, because that's mine. Well, it depends. I feel like 99% of my career has been, the response has been, well, it depends, right? So what perspective are they coming from, right? Was this my clinical engineering boss? Was this a nurse manager? Was this the finance department? Was it supply chain? Who was this? What question are they really asking? And that's a tough one. And that's where I would say over the course of my career, and certainly all of this sort of hit me 10 years in, it was like, you know, the epiphany, whatnot. And I really began focusing on this because it does depend. It depends on these two questions. So that was the beginning of a lot of the foundational way I think about the world as a clinical engineer, which is, yes, I have engineering skills. I was that education, but I'm working in a clinical environment that is really a business, right? And I was fortunate that my brain went back to a hallway conversation with my internship boss when we walked out of an administrative meeting, and I'm like, I don't understand what just happened in there. And this, to sum up, because I don't remember the details of the meeting, but the thing I remember from that conversation was, Carol, as a clinical engineer, you are the bridge between the technical, the clinical, and the business world. As a clinical engineer, you're going to be in all of those areas. You need not necessarily have all the answers, but to build the bridges so that we can find the optimal answer to the question in the middle, right? And that's oftentimes a hard thing for us in the HTM world, because we're running as fast as we can in the technical world, but we have to remember that these other two areas have a significant input. And for me, and the type of work I do, have done the vast majority of my career and now in private practice, understanding that there are three types of end of life has become critical. So we'll walk through each of these, and I will share with you what my thoughts are and what theoretically I will publish later, hopefully later this year or early next year, because I do feel like I can learn a lot from you guys, right? So call me out, keep me honest. All right, so let's start where we're most familiar, the HTM world. Yeah, do we have a letter? Well, which letter, right? Is it, so we talk about end of life. I have at a minimum 3 stages. It's in production, it's sold, everybody may or may not have it. You can get parts, you can buy a service contract, whatnot. That's green. Green, go, don't worry about it. We got other problems. I set a yellow flag when the manufacturer quits making it and selling it. I'm not panicking, I'm just aware. They've decided they're not going to make this anymore. So then I start asking questions. Set the yellow flag, I let people know, okay, this isn't being manufactured anymore. And then I look for the red flag, which is, no, I'm not going to sell you parts, and I'm not going to sell you service contracts, so you got to buy a new one. Well, maybe, depends, right? Because this is my technical world, I'm real familiar with this, right? I would suggest to you that this is what I start with most organizations, and have, even in the hospital. This is where we started, because remember, I'm having to communicate this to supply chain and executives as well. So, but because you have a stellar group of biomedical equipment technicians and clinical engineers, we may have a fourth flag that we can lean on, depending upon what it is. Early in my career, we had fleets and fleets and fleets of patient monitors because I worked in large health systems. So we could do things over time because we had our own parts pool, right? As we pulled stuff out and put new things in, there was our parts, right? Even though the manufacturer said we don't sell it anymore, we don't have parts anymore. So that was one technique we used. In other cases, we knew that this was a design obsolescence, right? We knew this was design obsolescence. We knew where we could get parts. Please don't tell me if you're buying parts off of eBay, I don't want to know. But we knew that we could continue to support it. It was a design obsolescence by the manufacturer. But this was a great segue because sometimes this happens, the manufacturer does this. There was a period of time when scopes, when optics were changing like this, right? And the problem was that we had to start looking at what's the end of the financial life. Can't tell you the numbers, counting people, CFO, finance type people screaming because there was this desire to replace product that was still on the books, right? So this AHA thing, and I am so glad Dr. Wang is right here because I'm in lockstep. This is about finance. This is not about the equipment's technical performance or its clinical performance for that matter. This is a depreciation schedule. It is written by the American Hospital Association. It is endorsed by the Healthcare Financial Management Association. And they clearly say this is about financial management. Now, I haven't read it recently, but I don't remember anything in there about it being the performance or the clinical life. And I tell clients, so help me, and I've told my hospital people this, so help me, I find out that you're end of lifing a sterilizer because after 7 years or 10 years, I'm gonna choke somebody. Right? That thing is still good. That's its book life. That's its financial life. And that's important though, right? Because it is way easier if something is technically end of life to have the conversation if it is also financially end of life. But if it's not, you can at least go into the conversation with your finance colleagues knowing that we have a different problem that we're going to have to solve, right? It's back to what questions are we trying to answer, right? Okay. So if you leave with nothing, please know that the age of the equipment is really important to understand if it's depreciated, not if it's still technically or clinically viable. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Questions? Yes. Because these are the two areas we deal with the most. We'll get into the other one. Yeah.
And so what I struggle the most is I always try to find where that 7-year span came from. I know there's some.
Don't worry about it. It's an accountant thing. It's a gap thing.
Yeah. And then, I mean, there's definitely some manufacturers that kind of work to that.
That's called design obsolescence.
And they try to utilize that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 Because recently I've had conversations. One of the other things that we'll talk about, and actually we could pop back if we go. I think this will go backwards. When we're looking in this area, there's more and more products where the manufacturer is tie that to serial number. Sometimes it's what you're talking about. It's this design obsolescence thing. They just want to sell another one in 7 years because that's how their flow sheet is set up. That's how their ledger, their EBITDA and all that is run, right? Their financial plan. Some of it is semi-legit because at some serial number, they change their supply chain and some important component or aspect of it has been redesigned, but it's not, you know, I can, as long as you're after this serial number, I can keep you running, you know, and I want to keep you running, but before this, because of whatever, I mean, yeah, you know, so there, you have to ask a lot of questions there. Like if there's not just everything covered on these two, you have to ask the question, help me understand why it's just a serial number for your technical planning. But if they just say, well, it's because after 7 years, we say it needs to be replaced, you can just shake your head and go, thank you very much, not going to happen. Right, because they're operating, they're counting on us to not know what this resource really is, right? They're counting on it because we haven't for years. Yes, sir.
Carol, I got a question then from a CMMS perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Employee useful life in for assets, not just capital, but operational assets as well. And utilizing that useful life date as in your capital planning and operational
Mm-hmm.
planning.
Yeah.
What is your recommendation there?
That's a tough one. Personally, I would use it like if I came and worked at your organization and that was the case, and I was your clinical engineer, I would use that as a flag or a trigger to engage in a conversation, not to make a decision. But that's because I know what this resource is. 25 years ago, I would have thought, oh, okay, it's done, because I didn't know, right? So ideally, and make sure we come back to this, we get to a place that we can have some real technical data about the life of. Okay, so let's come back to that. Okay, so these are the two things that I hear the most from clients. End of life letters from manufacturers, what can I still do in my shop, my organization, and now everybody's clear about what the financial life. So those are the first two. At a minimum, that's what I start my clients with, right? Because this is all data you have access to, right? You have ready access to it. All right, let me back up for a minute. That's not an entirely true statement. Those end of life letters, I've had this question asked a few times. I think we were talking about it the other night or yesterday. Some manufacturers are better than others. Do not rely on them mailing them to you. But if they do, please capture them. Mike, put them in the CMMS, right? Create a field and don't just put yes or no, right? I've had a couple of clients that just put true, false, yes, no. Put a date in there because the date allows you to do even more analytics and more planning and forecasting. Put the date in. July 1, 2023. Sometimes in those end of manufacture letters, they will also preview you with the end of service. So we'll go backwards. End of manufacture, sometimes we'll preview end of service date. Not always, but read the whole letter. Because if you have that date, if you have this end of service date, put that in your CMMS as well. Some organizations only put this one in. Well, guess what? You like went from green to red, right like that. You had no planning time, right? Get these, put them in there and monitor them. This one comes in and you have it. Hopefully it's not that day. Hopefully you've got some planning. You can decide when you want to prioritize that into your financial plans and operational plans, okay? Some manufacturers have better sites than others. So take what's mailed to you. I spend a lot of if you will, the value I bring to a lot of my clients is that I do the labor. I go dig for it, right? I'm scouring the internet, I'm making phone calls, I'm sending emails, I'm doing all that rinse and repeat, right? A few that come immediately to mind. Of course, anything respiratory from Philips is on a sheet. That's all out here. It all went yellow end of manufacture 2024. Most of their end of service is sometime in 2029. But that's all driven by the FDA, right? They're not allowed to sell that stuff anymore. So it's out there. They actually also, and I haven't spent a lot of time on it, they also have some sort of a link. I don't have any idea how often it's updated, but they say that they're providing insight into how often or when their parts disappear for these things. That's the other thing you have to be careful of, because there's a manufacturer that says we can support it just indefinitely, like until our parts are gone. I'm like, well, how do I know when your parts are gone? They never publish an end of service. Never, ever, ever. So that means then I have to ask a lot of pointed questions about, can you replace this? Can you replace that? What components, what pieces, parts can you replace? Because if they cannot, if there's a primary piece missing, then for all intents and purposes, it's end of service, right? I don't care if they can sell every other knob and switch. If they don't have this one thing, who cares? Because that's the one thing that's going to go out in my hospital anyway, right? So you have to, that's a professional judgment call that you may have to make in this. Sonosite has a very good website. You can go in, not just the ultrasounds, but down to the probes, which is very unusual. That's usually pulling teeth with manufacturers, is to get, because they have 9,000 models of probes and they all look alike, right? But Sonosite has a good one there. Most of the manufacturers are pretty good about responding. Your best bet, though, is to use your local, leverage your local sales and service organization for that information. If you can't get it, because some of them are sort of the way they're incentivized. Remember, this is about incentivization too. They want new product bought at certain times. And I get it, that's their job, that's how they make a living. You may have to call the 1-800 customer service and play dumb. But I also run into, they won't give me any information unless I have a note from Michele that says Carol's working on my behalf, right? Even in-house folks sometimes have to get a letter from their supply chain chief to get a manufacturer to share the information. So be aware you may need these extra little tools to do that digging. Other questions about finding this?
Even if it's in their best interest, let me know as a customer that they are end of manufacturing something.
Right, right. You would think that they would see that as a benefit, right? Okay. All right, we've kind of beat these two horses. The third one, which is really a passion of mine and where I'm really trying to get back to. I spent a lot of time in this space earlier in my career, but I firmly believe in an end of life from a clinical perspective. It can be perfectly fine for us to support. Still manufactured, parts are available all over overnight, cheap. But if it doesn't do what the clinicians need, it's clinically end of life. Or it may be that it does some of the stuff, but not all of it, because we're in a transition. Last life, when I was at KP, we were in a conversation because there was lung cancer screening, and the organization was trying to decide how clinically how they were going to transition their clinical protocols for screening. I'm listening very. I need to go back and tell the ClinTech team, the HTM team, what is changing from a clinical practice and protocol and ultimately reimbursement perspective, and does our gear do that? Can we do that? In some cases it was probably, some cases probably not even close, and some stuff in between, right? Maybe it wasn't full replacement, but we were going to have to budget for upgrades, right? Reconfiguration, whatever it might have been, right? So it's hugely important. Early in my career, when this really caught my attention, I was doing full-on technology assessment, which means I had to understand all of the engineering, the underlying engineering. because you guys know, they'll tell us it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. My favorite example is when I was given the project to look at pacemakers and implantable defibrillators to evaluate for a group purchase organization. And they wanted to know who should we contract with for this, which was sort of out of the norm because it's not a biomed, you know, we don't service it sort of thing. But I'm digging into it. Oh my goodness, these marketing people are amazing. But at the end of the day, it was still an accelerometer. It was a really good one, but it was still an accelerometer, right? And so that's when it really occurred to me, like, I get what they're doing to these clinicians, right? They're spending, and that's, I mean, that's why we all have jobs today, is because 60 years ago, the docs grabbed their engineer who'd lived next door or was fixing the HVAC system and said, help me understand this, right? Well, fast forward today, we should still be doing that in a much more sophisticated way, right? So same sort of red, yellow, green, stoplight. Remember, you want to keep this as simple and straightforward for the executives. Having sat in a chair in Execuland, I get why we like stoplights. There's a lot being thrown, right? So you want to focus. Like, don't worry about the green stuff. It's fine. Let's look down here at where our emergency, our more urgent situations are and what we can plan for. And these are just examples because it's sometimes hard. Like, I had the liberty of being a student of technology in that job where I first started learning this. Like, that was my whole job. So I had all day to go find the clinical protocols. Yeah, I'm thinking not many of you guys have that kind of time in your day, right? It may not be clear. Like, I also advocate this is another good reason to have rounds with your nurse executives and with your the different specialty nurse managers. What's the current protocol? What's the current practice protocol? Radiology, same sort of thing. What are the practice protocols? So we can make sure the gear matches. I always said we had closetfuls of toys, but until I know what you are trying to accomplish, I might give you the wrong toy. And then you're really gonna be mad at me, right? Yes?
So are you talking about like standardizing manufacturers or what?
No, just capability. Just capability. Understanding what they need clinically. Like, back to the example of the lung screening. I'll give you a very recent one. A question I just got from a client recently was, our doc is saying that we have to have, it's a standard that we have to have a 640 slice CT in trauma. I'm like, what? So I said, okay, your job is to go back and ask this physician for the citation of the standard. I'll go start looking for, I'll go look for the needle in the haystack. Well, that's what took me to these two. This is the American College of Surgeons. I'm like, okay, trauma, surgery, let's go to this. This would be an appropriate group to look to. No, their standards said 64. Now, obviously, if you want to have more slices, have at it. But the minimum standard, which is how most standards work, this is the minimum. If you are going to treat this trauma patient and keep them and manage them, 64. If you're not, if you're going to stabilize and ship them down the street, 16. Well, without even looking at a price book, I can tell you there's a big difference between 16 and 64. And I don't even have a fathom what a 640 slice would cost. Right? I mean, like, really. So the asking the why and the source. So back to, is this device end of life? Because I'd really like the new one I just saw at name your favorite conference. And I used to go to all those conferences. It's the same sort of conversation. Educate yourself. But this is a hard one. And I don't start here with most organizations. I encourage them, we talk about this, and I encourage them to have it in the conversation, in the prioritization, in the final decision making. But it's not really quantified in the tools yet. What I do then is I give them a surrogate. Say, let's look at utilization. Okay. Now, this one is a nut I'm trying to crack right now because there's a lot of fishiness, I'll say. All right. So utilization, general biomed, a lot of that equipment, you're not really going to look at utilization. Patient monitor is supposed to run 365 days, 24/7, right? Fusion pumps are supposed to run 365, 24/7. Anesthesia machines, ventilators, They have odometers on them, right? We can look at the hours. So we've got some utilization there we can look at. And imaging, there's like a zillion different ways to look at utilization there. Protocol, patients, clicks, whatnot, right? Pick something. The craziest thing though, now, because biomed equipment does not factor into how we bill in this country, the cost of those hours is rarely tracked. We track it because we want to do maintenance, right? But outside of that, there's not a lot of people that are looking at those hours. On the imaging side, though, there are metrics that are used because that's a revenue line for most organizations still. Now, how long that'll last, who knows? I mean, they've been talking value-based for 20 years. But right now, there's still, because of fee-for-service, somebody knows how many we did of something. The hard part here is figuring out who. I've had organizations literally tell me, oh, we don't have that data. I said, then how did you get paid? Somebody has this somewhere. So this one's hard only because organizationally, figuring out who is responsible for this, I typically start in PACs, right? Because that's sort of like where everything comes into and then goes out to the RIS, or maybe it's a PACs and a RIS. Figuring out that landscape is one way to potentially get to this. I think also the other challenge, and maybe it's because I'm an outside entity now, but my inside friends are running into the same thing. I think there's a hesitancy to release this information because of the perceived competitive, proprietary, confidential information. I don't want the patient name. I don't want the MR. I want to count. I want somebody to run me a flip and pivot table, right? Right? But it's getting to the right person that understands what you're looking for and being flexible in terms of what are we counting. My rule of thumb is be consistent. If we're counting clicks, fine. If we're counting number of patients, fine. What I'm trying to get at is, do we rarely use it? Do we use it pretty much all the time? Are we overusing it, or are we burning the thing out? That's where I'm trying to get to with this, which is more qualitative than I would like. But once we get smart at pulling that data, then we can get more quantitative. This helps me ask questions like, why is it here and you barely ever use it? Is that because it's broken all the time? Or is that because it doesn't meet the clinical protocol? Or my staff just doesn't like it? Yes.
Condition of participation, and it's, it's there available, but it's used. So
That could be too. That could be too.
Where do you get the data to benchmark what's average, what's high or low?
This is a very subjective still, because I have so much trouble getting this data. I don't feel comfortable with that. I would love for this to become a more quantitative piece of the puzzle. I also, at this point, and again, because of the opportunity to work across the country and knowing that patient demographics are very different, what might be normal and average in one region may be very different in another region because of the patient types. This goes back to, as HTM folks and me as a clinical engineer, needing to understand the clinical context in which I'm working.
yeah, there's also scheduling implications with physicians and blocks of hours.
Right? How they do it.
And we were trying to do some of the same stuff, and we were like, well, low would be, it's used one day a week. I mean, just to kind of try to put it in concept that our clinical folks and schedulers would go, wow, it's only twice a week. That seems weird, right? I mean,
Right.
But it gives them something.
Right. It's a great start the conversation and ask the 5 whys. Why do we schedule that way? Why do we give that to Dr. Carroll? Why? I mean, I've had customers that I'm like, you use that once a year? What does it do that nothing else in this building will do? Like, really? I mean, I'm befuddled. All right. And I honestly, I don't remember in that one exactly what the case was, but I'm pretty sure that that device went away. There was another one that got that, but it's because it was always broken, because Biomed couldn't get the parts. Well, then I started asking, why can't you get the parts? I mean, that was a whole different can of worms, right? But it begged the questions from a utilization, from a clinical Is this useful to me? Does it have a clinically useful life? No, I can't get it fixed, or no, it doesn't do anything I need to do. Or the other one that was in a room that I could barely walk in by myself. I'm like, how do they get a patient in here? Oh, well, no, oh, well. You either fix the room or do these pursuit, just like you don't need this asset on the books. Fix the room or get rid of it. Oh, yes, sir.
So Carol, on this information, the information here on larger devices, especially
Mhm.
or bigger and stuff, is this data that can be pulled from the machine by the manufacturer if they're willing to share it? And how much do we trust it? And will AI play an important piece in this?
I think so. Yes, maybe, hopefully, probably, I don't know, on all of those. Yes, this data is available. And I know this personally because in an organization, sitting in a management desk, getting a letter from a manufacturer that says, I'm really sorry, I pulled patient data instead of just equipment data, and I have to report this because it's technically a breach and blah, blah. So yes, I know they can get, they're looking at a minimum number of clicks, hours, things like, and they sell that to you guys as their remote monitoring, right? So it's there. Can we tap into it? They're not gonna let us do that right now. Do we trust it? Again, maybe, maybe not, don't know. AI, that's a whole nother conversation because I'm concerned about what we're training AI with. I mean, when something as stupid simple as pulse oximetry, many of us back in that life when I was the student, and we're like, oh, this is just gonna be a disaster. And my EMT buddy was like, let's just look at thumbnails, please. This is gonna be a mess. And look where we are today, right? Like,
Seems like what you mentioned earlier, you get that information just from facts. Just go to back, how many times was a shot taken on this?
yeah.
And I mean, you know, acknowledging that this is very subjective,
Right.
that at least is documented, they have the keys to that information, so the staff can go, hey, well, at
Yes.
least I know this isn't BS.
Yes, to me, and I talk in terms of my clients because I'm an old ball player. I'm like, some of these things are going to get you in the ballpark. Some of these things are going to get you to the parking lot. Now what you got to figure out is, do you have the VIP close-in parking, or are you an economy 6 blocks up the street, right? But you're right, it's more information than you had before you collected it. And if it does nothing more than beg questions, then as an organization, you get smarter about where's the data, is it good data, and what can I do, what questions can I answer with it?
We're actually, so we're working through that process right now. You're talking about, can you trust the
Yeah.
data and packs,
Mhm.
our ERP system, those kinds of things. And we've actually requested from vendors that are connected to our modalities now, we want to see what you have.
Good, because it's your data.
Yeah, it's our data. And we can strip off all the patient information, but.
Your vendor should not have patient information.
Oh, right.
Sorry, the clinical engineer in me is I'm having a stroke.
Strip all that away, and then we're able to say, this is what they see internally, this is what our PAC sees, this is our procedure, I mean, those kinds of things. We're trying to figure out what the source of truth is, and then
How to validate that.
based on the information we have, then we can determine, do we still need it from the vendor or not,
Right.
based on health need.
Yeah, and that is really a function of the sophistication of the organization, because I do have clients where the imaging directors are still tracking things on a piece of paper or in a spreadsheet. And I'm like, why don't you get it from PACS? You have it, you have PACS, right? And so there's this operational disconnect. Guess what? Now you just created a channel of conversation that allows your organization to think differently about things. Like, why? Your imaging director has, just like you guys as HCM directors, has a zillion better things to be doing, right? So it's a maturity thing. You have to crawl then walk, and sometimes just dragging yourself across the floor is an improvement, right? These are great questions, commentary. Anything else? All right. So now, what do I do once? So now I've set these definitions. My advice, as always, consistently is be consistent. Be consistent, right? Set your definitions, write them down. Whenever I give a product back to a client, there's a tab, there's a page, there's something that says, here are the definitions, here are my assumptions, here's any abbreviations I used, here's them spelled out and what that means. All right, so that we can all be talking the same language and we're not making assumptions about, oh, well, I thought she meant, right? Okay, because we want to know why is this important. Now we're back to that. Dr. Wang, is this device end of life? Well, now we can answer that question 3 ways, right? Depending upon whatever he's interested in knowing. Now, this is where I want to segue to what Matt's real life example. He's working with the clinical engineering folks up in British Columbia. They're working on a number of different projects as they are really driving consistency across the province, much like you try to drive consistency across your health system, okay? So quoting or citing recent publications from colleagues Ben Wang, Scott Skinner, and their team about the impact of age. Read this, it's worth the read, okay? And it substantiates. So when your boss says, yeah, well, but who said, because they will, you've got published documents, okay? So Matt's taking that in our conversations as we're trying to codify. They are writing policies for their 200,000 devices up there in the far north. And they have a particular, as they're looking at end of life, when he says modifications, at first I thought, I'm like, what are you doing, right? He's like, no, it's more the when somebody is trying, it's end of life-ish, whatever the person's definition is, and we're doing the good old, well, I got enough chicken wire, duct tape, and chewing gum to put this thing back together for another 5 years, right? So evaluating their practices and their behaviors. First thing was, all right, well, let's put some definitions together and let's understand what the rules of the road are, right? Is this truly a modification? Let's write out our policy to define what that is and what drives it and what's okay and what's not okay. And we're going to use in their case, the Canadian standards that are applicable to their practice standards for engineers, okay? So that was the real life problem, but going on simultaneously, oh, I'm sorry. He also shared with us, this is the whole, are you using wire duct tape and chewing gum, or is this a legit, what are you doing? Should you really be doing this modification or not, right? And is it truly a modification or is it a repair, whatnot, okay? Trying to decide, make sure we're clear from the Canadian perspective, okay? But at the same time, they're rolling the whole province into a new CMMS. Anybody here doing a new CMMS province? I'm like, oh, yeah. Or if you're not doing it now, you probably recently did it. And if you're not doing it, by the time you get home, somebody will have decided you're going to do it because apparently it's the thing to do right now. So they want to go live in 2025. They're doing a great job in terms of laying out a game plan. A lot of that has to do with these definitions and standards of documentation and whatnot. Because the whole idea is, how do we make it easy for the frontline staff to document? We don't want to pay them to document, we want to pay them to do the work, but we need the documentation because we need actionable data. Our management team, our engineers need to be able to look at this data and make decisions about end of life, about repair, about staffing, about AEM, about forecasting, all of these different things, right? And if we build all of these definitions in to the CMMS, then it'll support us. It'll go back to what you were saying, Mike. It'll be there. What we have today will be there, but we will have created a placeholder for what we don't have. So maybe we don't have that utilization. Maybe we're still negotiating with PACS and convincing them that they have what we want and need. And maybe we want it in the CMMS, but maybe we don't. Maybe we want to be able to merge it downstream, whatever. But we have a placeholder, we know that we need that data. We know why we're collecting it and what we're going to use it for. At a minimum, we may come up with new ideas, but we have a plan. We're not just, I like to say, taking the cereal box and pouring it into the bowl and saying, there you go, I got a CMMS. Just add milk. So this was, all part of that conversation Matt and I had that drove this. And then some of them he identified, and of course, these were things he shared with me during the conversation. Integrations they wanted to make. So supply chain and purchasing system, that goes back to what was the actual purchase date. How many of you if you want to respond or not, but ISO comes in and their purchase date, and when they're putting everything into theirs, too often is the date they got the contract. Not everyone does that, but all too often that happens. Or in-house folks are just as bad. When it gets insourced, your purchase date is the day you got the contract, so to speak, right? That's when you entered it into the system, not when it was born, right? If only I could move my own birthday that easy. So having this integration may help with born on dates and the cost. What did we spend on it, right? What was our purchase price? Recall, a more advanced tier 2 technical end of life tool that I work with health systems. Once they can collect the letters, once we're good at that, then we start talking about what does your maintenance data look like? Does it include recall, safety alerts, incident investigation reports? Can we start looking at mean time between failures? Can we look at causes of failures and group them together? Can we start doing the analytics? While there may be somewhere down the road, we'll have some general industry benchmarks. So every one of you guys know it has a lot to do with users. Back in the day, we had, when we had mass spectrometers in the ORs, they just were obliterated every August. Like what? Who shows up on July 1? New users. Yeah, but it's because we had data, we could look at it and then have the aha moment. Oh, it's this set of users. As soon as we train them and put some guardrails around things, problem solved, right? Then they were legit failures when they actually had failures, right? Service contracts, right? Is it under contract or not? These sort of things. Matt and his team want to be able to know if it's end of life, do I really want to renew the service contract on it? Do you know how many organizations have stuff on service contract that's not even in the inventory anymore? It's not on site anymore, it's gone. Yeah, that's a whole nother topic for another day. But if you have this in here, then you can have these triggers. That might be a financial trigger as you look at end of life too, right? Like, when does that come due, right? And so then putting in the ability with all these end of life definitions where I can capture the data in the CMMS is great, because if you don't capture it in your CMMS, you end up with somebody like me who has to do it in a spreadsheet. Yes, sir.
Mentioning CMMS, they should store the purchase date and the use date. Does that make sense?
Honestly, I would throw in those are great, and those are super helpful for somebody who sometimes gets blanks. The other one, and I'm glad you asked that, is manufacture date. Manufacture date is really, really important because sometimes it makes complete sense clinically and financially and technically to buy refurbished gear.
10 years later, when you're gonna need it, having all three, that makes sense, just because the discussion could go anywhere.
Right, and just because you purchased it in January of 2024 doesn't mean it wasn't built in July of 5 years earlier, right? So it's really 5 years older than you think it is, which, again, not basing this on age, but as biomedical equipment technicians and clinical engineers, we should be able to take that information and automatically ask the question, what's the technological age of that device?
Now I can see how all three is that it's gonna be 10 years later you need it, and rather than trying to figure out exactly what your agreement is with this company now, you have that in use date, you may find it falls into their,
How they manage their product. Right.
whether they cover it or not.
Right.
10 years later.
Right, right, absolutely. And keep that in mind, end of life for them is different than end of life for us. They're doing product life, we're doing take care of people life, right? I mean, they're two different purposes. And honestly, as just sort of an obsessive clinical engineer, I like the idea of manufacture date. I want to go into their product life cycle. I do, because of the kind of work I've done. I want to go all the way back, like, when did you guys start even thinking about this? Because I'm trying to put a technological label on this thing in terms of, is this bleeding edge, mainstream, obsolete? Like, okay, you still make it and sell parts, but the dadgum thing is, it's obsolete. There are better technologies, right? So I like to expand all the way, but at a minimum, I would say, what's your purchase date? And if you can get the manufacture date, which may or may not align because of all these circumstances, that's a good one to have too. It's just harder to get, especially when you inherit things. Who knows? But that's where serial numbers, be consistent with how you document serial numbers, because then you can go back to the manufacturer, because they do have to have that information to tell you when it was manufactured. Now, whether they'll tell you or not is another question, but they have it somewhere. And if they bought 3 companies, they may have crashed that database and legitimately can't give it to you anymore because they broke everything. But anyway, so like I said, the more you can get into your CMMS, and part of what I do is talk to CMMS vendors, it's like, build this in. Well, we want them all to do their own planning. I agree. But your job is to build data fields and help them set definitions, right? So you don't have to do a spreadsheet. So whenever I do a spreadsheet for somebody, I tell them, I steal words from my IT friends because they stole words from us. I say, this is a wireframe. This is a design document to use and build your CMMS with, right? All of these things, all this data and definitions can go into your CMMS. Figure it, not customize it. Are we all clear? Customize is a bad word because you can't keep living with it, or you live with it as it was when you, right? We had that conversation, didn't we? Anyway, so this is the end that most folks are looking for in a capital plan. When they're asking, is this end of life? They want to know, where is it going to fall in my capital plan? When do I get to buy a new one, right? But to get to this distribution over years and prioritization and whatnot, you have to go through those other 3, right? So technical, be careful. This is about your quality of data, right? And this came right off of a client I did a while back. I said, be careful, because we couldn't find 20% of the end of life. Or maybe this came off of like I was midstream in the analysis and I still had 20% to find, or something like that. My personal goal is to find 90% or more. I really want all of it, and but I'm really happy if I'm over 90, and I'm thrilled if I'm at 95. 20, I'm like, I gotta keep digging. I gotta try some other channels. I gotta look other places, right? But sometimes you just can't, right? And so you just need to know, all right, the green segment's suspect because it's the 80-20 rule, all right? Similar on financial. There's no way all of that gear is still on the books. There's no way, right? But it's because the install dates from that particular client were horrible. I mean, it was clear, they were all the same, like there were just pages and pages. I'm like, all right, well, clearly that's when somebody entered this into the CMMS, not when it was actually purchased. So you have to be careful, and quality of data, just get better at it, right? In this case, the client was like, yeah, I know it's horrible, but here's what we put in place so that it'll get better. I mean, that's what we want to go for. Don't be paralyzed by the imperfect. Keep moving forward. And then clinical, we already talked about this, using these subjective, and I literally sit down with clinical department heads, or I do a survey, whatever, when I was in the hospital, I walked over and we had a conversation. If I'm not in the hospital, we do surveys, right? And Get their personal feedback. Yeah, it's their gut, or it's their little spreadsheet or their little piece of paper or whatever, but it's something, okay? It's a quality of data thing, it's data, right? And then it begs the questions. Then you can start drilling, finding out what's the clinical implication of I never use it to I'm burning it out. What's the why there, all right? Because remember, ultimately what we're gonna try to do is prioritize how we're gonna spend our capital, limited capital dollars. So we get to a place where, in me, I always try to keep it simple. I try to keep everything binary, yes, no, right? You saw that in my definitions. The clinical one is the hardest one because we're still working on that. Financial, is it depreciated or not? Some organizations are like, no, but I don't like yes or no. So we build in a 3, 1, 2, 3, or 0, 1, 2, because it's not depreciated, it is depreciated within the last 5 years, or it's been depreciated for more than 5 years. Okay. After that, I just add them up. Okay, because I'm not creating a shopping list. I'm creating a guidance tool. All right, that's the thing that scares me the most is when a client says, well, but I need you to tell me what to buy. I don't live with you. I don't know, but I can give you some guidance. I can give you a map. I can give you some information from your data so that you can make a somewhat more informed decision, right? And so then we set ranges, you know, for red, yellow, green, again, for the executive, based on all these. This total score could be driven by any of these. It's set up, again, this is thinking about how you set the measure up. Any of these can drive it to red. If the clinical is red, it will drive to red. If the financial won't drive it to red. That's just like stay out of trouble with your CFO. But technical or clinical, either one can drive it. Right? And it really jumps to the top, you might expect, if both technical and clinical are yellow to red, then it really, but now you have a thing that says technically, this is a risk, and clinically, this is a risk. So back to the 3 parts of healthcare, now we're helping them get to the middle for a more informed, you know, people talk about data driven. We can have data all day long. What's the information we get out of that, right? What are we communicating to our executives? What is the data telling us? Sure.
One item no longer manufactured, over 5 years past AHA with high volume, stay at a 6 forever?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
Utilization could change.
Right, but I mean, I'm saying it's highly used, it's completely outdated, 20 years, it still would never.
Wait, oh, you're saying this is red?
It would stay at a 6, it would only be yellow.
So if it's 2, oh, yes, but it's when you get to the yellow, you're at least having conversations, right? And again, just because it's red there doesn't mean you can't take care of it still. You may not be happy about it.
And it can be yellow and you can decide to give it. So.
Right. Yeah, because I'm not giving you a shopping list. I'm saying these are the real dogs that you need to look at. And maybe some of them you're not going to replace. You may say, yep, and now we have a really good excuse to get rid of that, right? And we're not going to replace it because we're going to operationally do something different, which allows us to step into the yellow zone. Or there's information I don't have as the clinical engineer about organizational strategy, that they're bringing on a new service line, a new provider, something, a partnership, something that says something that was in yellow is going to get bumped because I didn't know that information to factor it into the clinical end of life, right? I didn't know that. There's a lot of things, a lot of what ifs. So the idea is that rather than just giving your executives a pile of requests, you've done some due diligence already to prioritize. Doesn't mean the deck's not going to get shuffled, but at least they now know what's on the table and what they're taking off the table and what they're leaving on the table. Which in most executive suites these days, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what's on the table. They don't know what they're leaving. Yes?
Any particular reason you choose 5 years as on top of AHA number, because it's just a nice round number, or?
I use a 5-year plan. It's not an AHA number because some things depreciate over 10 years or whatever. But I use 5 because it seems to be relatively, yeah, and I'll do that for people. It's just a number that seems to be consumed well in my experience. I have colleagues that do 10-year plans because like the folks at Kaiser do a 10-year. They recognize where the crystal ball gets fuzzy, but they have to do that because they have their own construction company that never stops, right? Until dirt runs out in their regions, they're going to keep building, and then they'll just tear down the old stuff and start building new stuff, you know? So they have to do a 10-year to inform their in-house equipment planners of what to begin putting in budgets, because a construction project is budgeted 7 to 10 or more years out. Whereas other healthcare organizations, they're like, can you just help us this year? I'm like, no, we're going to look at least 3, and I'd prefer you look at 5.
Oh, you said, oh, this is a special bucket.
Yeah, no, and that's great. That varies. So could everybody hear the question? The question was, do I have a special bucket for backup equipment, right? That redundancy backup. I personally have to read every client. Like many of you that are in ISOs that have multiple clients, when they're all exactly the same and completely different. What's their culture? Some of them don't have redundancy. Some of them have redundancy for their redundancy. And so I use that more for like the next tier. So once we get to this, we start using it to ask those questions. What it's rarely used, why? Oh, it's your backup. Okay, well, let's talk about what happens there. That's when I go full on into clinical engineer mode and start trying to understand what their clinical operations are, what their concerns are, you know, because the coasts are worried about especially the East Coast, worried about hurricanes and flooding and things like that, whereas California might have some sort of redundancy that's more specific to earthquake and seismic stuff, the Midwest because of electric and ice storms and whatever. You know, I need, again, for me, it becomes a contextual conversation and a risk tolerance conversation for them, because some of these folks have too much, some don't have enough, and some of them haven't even thought about it from a risk. They don't even know why they have it, because Carol told me to have it. I don't know why I have it. I don't know. Go ask Carol. Yeah, because we've always had it. I don't know why I have it. Yeah, so I use that as a maturity thing. Down the road, all of these can be codified, right? As we get smarter, learn where the data, set the definitions. In the technical piece, I would love for it to be more based on our maintenance data, but unfortunately today, my clients have not had sufficiently strong maintenance data. They say it themselves, I'm not ready to go there and base, my recommendations on that. I'm like, well, that's a scary proposition. But I would love for it to be a part of this, right? It's this calculation. Finance, like factoring in, is it leased versus owned versus whatever sort, is this tied back to some 400-year contract I have with my favorite OEM, what, right? I mean, all of these can get deeper. What I'm suggesting here is where we start. Set a good baseline, good practice. All right, I'll start here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes. Yes. So for those of you that couldn't hear, the comment was when it's rarely used, it might be because it does not meet the clinical needs. It doesn't do what the clinicians need. And therefore, another device is excessively used because that's the one that has to pick up all the slack. Do we have those conversations? Absolutely. One, because this is still pretty subjective, right? And so we have to have a conversation and tease those details, those context details out, right? And what that does then is it will impact here, because what we may say is this may stay the same, but what we thought we were going to buy is going to be something different. Like we're not going to replace the one that's rarely used because it's not the right thing. We're not going to do 1 for 1, because what happens with these things a lot of times, it's 1 for 1. I'm going to just buy another of what I had, the new one of the old one, right? But I don't want to do that here because this one doesn't do what I need to do anymore. I'm going to buy another one of these, but I'm not going to replace this one because if I take the load off of it, it'll be fine technically, right? And so then perhaps I've avoided spending some capital dollars inappropriately. Absolutely. You get an A on your rotation report. Number yeah. No, there's other topics on this. Yeah, no, and because many of my mentors have tried to make me the kinder, softer Carol, with limited success. We as a community, all right, this is Carol, this is an editorial sidebar. We blew it.
Yeah.
When I was in my first job, my first management job was for technicians that took care of computer equipment. And the peers above me were all like, we don't take care of PCs. Those are beneath us. We don't take care of PCs. Who reports to who now? We blew it. We blew it. So from the way back, I still think that's my data. It's on a medical device. It's my domain. And I'm going to be, as you can tell, I'm a little outspoken. I'm going to be assertive. And I'm going to say, I'm going to make the IT person partner with me, right? And I'm going to say, we're going to account. I'm not taking your interest in mind. I'm taking the clinician and the patient's interest in mind. I could care less what OS system you're on. Does it take care of my clinicians and my patients? Because I had a CIO tell me I had to replace, and this was WannaCry days, and I wanted to cry for so many reasons. I had to replace everything that was OS something and back. And I said, okay, point one, can you find me well over 300 billion with a B dollars? How soon? And then I'm going to need somebody to help me find a device that actually has the operating system you want, because it's just not there. And oh, by the way, these are medical devices, not IT devices. They're incredibly smart for their purpose. They're incredibly stupid for yours. They don't even, some of them don't even use a whole operating system. They use this little piece, right? So there's an education and a partnership and a collaboration rather than yelling at them like I just did. You build the understanding because they just don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm.
They're going to start listening to them more because I'm watching them happen right now.
Because we're not going into the mahogany row or wherever it is that we need to go. We have got to find a way to do that. No, or get them to be your advocate. I don't disagree with you. I've personally fought that battle. Right, and we'd much rather hug than punch, but yes. No, I commend you for that because we have to have that conversation because this whole end of life thing is going to get harder and harder. And it's going to be less about the hardware firmware. Can I upgrade this thing to, I give you a box and I just keep shipping new software. So that whole end of life, end of technical life, that in this very traditional historic method by which we've tracked it in the past is going to change. And it's going to be is the OEM supporting it or not is less about the serial number because I changed this firmware piece, but it's, does all my firmware still reside with the software? Because now it's a primarily software. I mean, some of you guys are old enough. Remember the old HP, and then when Merlin showed up, and it was basically
Laptop.
right, yeah. Well, I think, and this is an earlier conversation we had about the inventory. And I think we have to do a better job of defining our inventories, not just like the old days with facilities and the infamous grade list things, but the mayhem we have with IT. And we have to make sure that they're aware of, yes, it is a laptop, but it's a laptop with a medical device loaded on it. This is just the carrying case, so to speak. Yeah, and so we need to have those conversations because it puts them, they need to understand the game of Jeopardy they're playing by not acknowledging the intended use, right? And what the expectations would be. And we're gonna have to figure out a way to collaborate with them. And I realize they can be very difficult, but at the same time, I will tell you personally, back at that WannaCry thing, when these crazy expectations were swirling up here, and I was a vice president, I called my IT vice president friends, you know, all 27 of them for their different areas. And I said, guys, this is insane. Can we get in a room on a call, something, and talk like real thoughtful people? And they're like, oh, thank God you called. Oh, thank God you called. And things changed. Now, not quickly, right? And realities went on the table and people were like, yeah, you know, including myself, yeah, I'm doing this and saying this because I'm trying to avoid this thing. And IT, yeah, we're saying this because, and we started actually solving a problem. So where you engage, what I figured out, only took me running into the wall 3 times, was where to engage, right? The CIO was not the right thing because the incentive is different than my peers. And the managers or directors that reported to them, like me, we had a different incentive, if you will, to solve this problem. And we actually had the tools to do it. So that would be my advice, is try to find out maybe who you're engaging with is politically right, but functionally not. And the person that reports to them might be thrilled when you call them, and because then that higher up will get off their back too, maybe. I'll cross my fingers for you. Yeah.
Carol, thank you for giving us this level. I look forward to your criteria you use once it hits a yellow or red. The next thing in the, you know, as we continue this, you know, the obsolescence, is there, you know, what the next things are you evaluate once it gets to the
Yeah, well, as soon as,
presentation?
yeah, well, as soon, we had this discussion yesterday morning, was it yesterday morning, about, you know, we as a community have to do some very important things for us to get any more sophisticated. This is not rocket science, people. I'm good, but I'm not that good, right? My nephew's the rocket scientist.
You know the next question you asked.
Yeah, but we as a community have to make some very important, difficult decisions. We have to standardize our data. We have to make some decisions about, you know, how are we going to spell GE, right? It's 2 letters with, you know, I mean, like, people, really. We have to make some decisions about what we're going to call this widget. Somebody calls it a clicker, somebody else calls it a remote, somebody else calls it a light beam, right? We have to come up, and we have, you know, we have to stop the, I mean, I love creative writing as much as the next technical person, but we have got to quit reinventing the wheel. We have to make some standard decisions so that we can then do this, even in our own organization. Don't worry about everybody else. Clean up your own house, right? Set the rules. Set the rules so you can do it in your house. Then we can have sessions like this to say, here's what we're, oh, well, but I do this. Oh, well, then let's all standardize that direction. But right now, it's the wild, wild west, north, south, and east, right? I mean, shameless plug, Matt and I wrote 2 white papers about failure codes and about work order types. And people said, oh, this is great. I'm going to adopt it, but I'm going to change this, 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 and this. Great. Great. The VA, on the other hand, now granted, they're a .gov and they've got a heavy hammer. I'm not a big fan of heavy hammers, but they've got rules. And that's what happened. It's not perfect. I've talked to them. They know it's not perfect. But it's way closer to perfect than what most of us have out here in the private sector. Because they set rules, right? There's some consistency. Consistency. That's what's going to get us, because otherwise we're going to kind of be stuck here, except for if we can finally get the PAX people to release or the risk people to release some data. But we're going to be stuck here because what does mean time between failure mean if your techs aren't putting down labor hours, if they're not putting down parts costs, if they're not even putting down a work request. And that's not on the technician. As a manager, and hopefully as a leader, that's not on the techs. That's on us as managers. We need to tell them why that's important to them, not to me. Because my job is to support them. I should be taking all that data and doing something to make their life better. They're able to support it better, more effectively, they're not wasting their time on things. Because as a manager, I'm looking at the bigger picture and enabling them. They're not chasing ghosts. So until we as managers do that, I'm not going to yell at the techs. If we set the rules though, then we will hold, and engineers, all right? That's another interesting conversation I'm having with clinical engineers. The VA has tons of clinical engineers. Kaiser has tons of clinical engineers. The Northeast in Boston, tons of clinical engineers. And I just get so mad at my colleagues because, and I'm loving that this is recorded because they'll hear it again, which is, and I knew this, and I'm guilty until I was doing consulting work in one of my jobs, consulting for a company. I realized, I have to know whether this job I'm doing is within budget, right? You know, there was the markup. I'm like, I should probably track my hours. How much time do I spend on this? Because before I didn't care, right? Well, now as a business owner, I really care, right? And what it's also taught me is I need to ask you before we do a deal, I need to know a little bit about your data. If it's fixed fee engagement and you have crappy data and I spend more time than I thought it was, my profit margin goes down. I may or may not pay my mortgage that month, right? But if I'm hourly, I feel horrible when I'm spending, invoicing you for a bunch of hours to clean up your data, because that's not really what we wanted to do to begin with. Now, you may find that valuable. I find it annoying, but you're paying me, so I'm happy. But, we as engineers need to be tracking. And another light bulb went off when I was responsible for projects in a hospital, as they're coming to do these construction projects and they want these engineers and technicians involved. And I'm trying to figure out, I don't know where I could look at the work, get whatever data out of the CMMS, but I have no idea where my engineers are spending hours. None. And it doesn't have to be fancy. I mean, we literally, one of them found an app that was free, and I'm just like, that's great. We have 6 projects. I did about an hour. I did about my whole day. I need that to be directionally correct so that I can keep you guys and get more staff if we need it because of the project load. I have no idea how long it takes to do a OR renovation or a whole tower. I have no idea. So us engineers, we need to be tracking our time as well so that we can add that into some of these analytics as well. If it's in the CMMS, that's great. If it's someplace else, that's fine. Just have the data and be consistent about how you collect it. Cool?
Thank you.
You guys are awesome.